So I'm here with Tim Berners-Lee, who I guess we can introduce you as the inventor of the internet.
Nope.
No?
You can introduce me as the inventor of the web.
The World Wide Web.
The World Wide Web, 1989. The internet was 1969. I know you may not have been around for either of them.
I was around for 89.
Okay.
I don't remember it well. But that's right, of the World Wide Web. And Karen Bartleson, who is the president of the IEEE Association.
IEEE Standards Association.
IEEE Standards Association.
Yes.
We're off to a great start here. So you're doing a lot of work today, panels today on open standards. Can you explain to maybe lay people what exactly that means and why it's important?
Well, the reason that the web works is that when you click on a link, your computer talks across the internet. It sends an HTTP message, and that HTTP language is understood by the server at the other end. So, you've heard of HTML as well. That's the language that the web page is written in. For the web to work, everybody's got to be able, all the browsers have got to be able to understand the same HTML. So the open standards, the fact that everybody who's involved has agreed on this particular language, enables the whole thing to take off. Without that, there'd be no web.
Right.
And believe it or not, there are whole organizations of people who simply sit down and define what these standards should be. And most people, when they think of standards, would want to go to sleep, but it's really interesting. And so what we're here at South by Southwest talking about is a paradigm that we're calling Open Stand. So it's a modern way that these organizations get together and produce the standards. So they do it with cooperation, they do it voluntarily, so no government organization saying you will use HTML or you will use this. It's the marketplace that decides. And the reason it's open is anybody can participate. So people from emerging countries, emerging economies can all participate at what we call the global standards table that ultimately benefit humanity, like the World Wide Web has done.
Right. So are we in danger of, the end of open standards? Or are we in danger of having closed systems?
Well, there's always been a threat, because if you're a company, which is a big player, and you decide, we'll make the next version of, our browser, have some features which we'll patent, and we'll sort of extend the standard in a way that it'll only work with certain servers. Then everybody will have to get our browser, and then everybody, so that so we'll be able to take control of the whole market. Obviously, then that, if that were to happen, then obviously you'd lose interoperability, it would break the web, it wouldn't be one web anymore. You'd lose a whole lot of innovation, and you'd lose competition. So the prices would go up, people would start locking things down. Right. So there's always, any sensible company has got to be always looking for a way to see if they can sneakily grab proprietary control of something. There's also, of course, governments are always interested in, sometimes in trying to control the internet as well. But there's a sort of constructive tension, and so there's people trying to innovate and typically put something in their product which nobody else has got, and then rapidly, then they have to, everybody else has adopts it, and then the standard evolves, and a new version of the standard comes out, and it's got this new feature in it.
Would you be able to provide any, kind of illustrative examples of that evolution?
The evolution of open standards?
Or when a company kind of maybe develops something that is proprietary, and then that becomes part of the open standard.
When W3C first started, the Netscape and Microsoft were battling it out.
Right.
The web was very simple then. You couldn't have tables in the web pages initially, and then when so lots of people introduced different tables, but every browser, and there were a bunch of browsers out there, every browser had it different. So if you were trying to make a web page, then people would say this web page is best. You have to download Netscape, or you have to download Microsoft. And they used to, in those days, tell you all, they should tell you, and you have to set your screen to this size. And so these web pages, maybe you can't, but they made so many assumptions about that you're using particular proprietary technology that in fact you probably couldn't, those web pages won't work with today's browsers. But then there was so much pushback. Not only is W3C like IEEE standards, IEEE-SA is a standards body where you can come and form a group and get these things defined. But then also other groups, things like the WASP, the Web Standards Project, formed, just trying to give people a hard time, give people, if they didn't use standards, go to websites and say, look, why aren't you using HTML like it's written? Go to browser manufacturers and say, well, hey, look, you call it an HTML browser, but you don't actually implement the spec. Things like that. So there's a lot of pushback, and from the press as well. Really, we rely on the press holding people accountable.
Right.
I can give you two examples. One's an old one and one's a new one. So the old example would be the IBM PC. The IBM PC made open interfaces, which then bred this entire market that we now know as the PC, which maybe is going away because of mobility. But had the whole interface, the architecture not been open, then where would we be today? So that's an old, before your time. So the PC changed the entire world. The modern example would be Google with their Android operating system. So they acquired the technology and said, we're going to make this open. Anybody who wants to write applications or put it on their devices is free to do so. And Android is yet another example of how it's changing because it became open.
So you mentioned two channels of pressure that you're able to put on companies, to keep open standards. One, the press. Two, kind of just, it seems like direct pressure almost. Are those the main methods to, to maintain open standards?
Well, because I suppose lots of people, the customers, it depends on the market, but in some cases customers. Among the consortium members, for example, Boeing is a company. So Boeing is a big company, uses a lot of IT, so that when the representative from Boeing says, guys, we need you to make a standard here, and we're going to buy from the place that implements the standard, that carries a lot of weight. Right.
Why is that? Why are those market forces better than a kind of top-down? Why is it better than writing it into law?
When you write it into law, that can stifle innovation. So the law says you will do this version, period, everybody, and that prevents innovation on top of it. So you become stagnant with that mandated standard. Sure. Whereas when the market decides, it says, I like that new version, or I don't. And that allows you to choose and then migrate to what works better as opposed to what has been mandated. So, if you're told you can only drive a certain vehicle, you're going to be stuck with that vehicle, and you won't be able to build the newest on top. So.
And there's no incentive to develop.
No incentive whatsoever. And when it's mandated, I could go out on a limb and say the people who are doing the mandating don't understand how to develop it and innovate it in the first place. Whereas the market, these are the people who consume it and actually live and breathe it, and so they're the ones that are actually more expert at deciding what should go. And
Congressmen are not known for their tech savvy.
You said that, not me. But typically, government and policymakers are looking out for the well-being of their constituency. And that's where safety standards come in that are extremely important things that they can legislate. But when they legislate technology, they're preventing the fast-paced innovators from being able to step in and say, this is what we want. And then the consumer saying, I want a mobile device. I don't want the government to say, you have to have a tablet that's this big. I want something like this.
Sure.
So accessibility is something where the governments often do legislate because they feel that they need to apply pressure to themselves, even to make websites which are accessible to people with disabilities. And so then what happens is that on a good day, the government will say you have to have an accessible website. And by the way, if you would point to the W3C web accessibility guidelines and on the website and say, and by the way, you're not going to get in trouble in our book if you follow these guidelines. So then they point by reference, and the great thing is, now on a bad day, the government says, yes, we need to have some accessibility guidelines. These W3Cs look good. Let's adopt them. Let's work on them a little bit and tweak them for our own use, and then let's publish them ourselves. And then, if they publish them themselves, yes, they're out of date, of course, because the W3C guidelines are evolving. Right. Now we have WCAG 2, for example, on WCAG 1. But also, just publishing your own version means that companies have to check both to make sure they're the same. It's a lot of work if you're implementing it. Imagine how many countries there are out there. If everybody publishes their own version, you have to check it all the same. And of course, the temptation is huge to make it not quite the same. and think, yeah, they made a quite
Right.
good choice, but we're going to make it slightly different. So then you've got, then it just becomes impossible, because when you're writing software for the web, it's got to work in every country.
Right.
So that's so the way it works on a good day is that the governments point to these open standards organizations like IEEE and WPC.
Okay.
And that's actually the point of Open Stand, is to have these market-driven, open, voluntary standards be recognized the same way that government-mandated standards are. And so that's what we've been talking about this week, and those principles of being open and letting the market decide as opposed to the government. So.